On a cold night deep inside a thick African forest, a tiny baby girl cried from inside a woven basket that had been left beneath a giant baobab tree. Her small hands shook from the cold, and her tears rolled across her cheeks because nobody came to hold her. Around her neck was a cloth marked with a royal symbol that she could not understand. The moonlight shone on her face while the wind moved the grass around her. For many hours she remained alone, and it seemed that the forest itself was listening to her cries. Then a large female elephant slowly walked toward the basket and stopped beside it. She touched the baby's face gently with her trunk and refused to leave her side. As morning arrived, many animals gathered around the child. Small birds landed on the basket. Monkeys climbed down from the trees carrying fruits, and an antelope lay nearby as if guarding her. The elephant remained beside the baby and would not allow any dangerous creature to come close. Days passed, and the animals somehow kept the little girl alive. Whenever she cried, the elephant carried her to a stream where clear water flowed between the stones. Whenever it rained, the elephant covered her with branches and stood over her until the storm ended. The little girl had no family, no name, and no memory of where she had come from, yet she was not completely alone because the forest had accepted her. The years passed quietly, and the baby became a young girl, but she never left the forest. She learned to understand the sounds of the animals and could tell when the birds were happy or afraid. She followed the elephants to hidden streams and ran beside antelopes across open grasslands. She made a bed from soft leaves and watched the stars every night. Sometimes she held the old royal cloth that had been left with her and wondered why it looked different from everything else in the forest. Deep inside her heart, she felt that someone somewhere had once loved her and then disappeared. One evening she climbed a rocky hill and noticed something she had never seen before. Far beyond the forest, a thin line of smoke rose into the sky. She stood there for a long time and could not stop staring at it. The elephants became restless and slowly moved away, but the girl remained on the hill. Questions filled her mind. Was someone living beyond the trees? Were there others who looked like her? Why had she never seen another human face? The setting sun painted the sky red while she stood completely still, feeling a strange loneliness that she had never known before. That night she could not sleep. She sat beneath the giant baobab tree where she had been found as a baby and held the old cloth tightly in her hands. For the first time, she carefully examined every part of it and noticed a golden thread sewn into one corner. The thread formed a symbol that looked important, though she could not understand its meaning. Tears slowly filled her eyes because she suddenly realized that she did not know who she was. She did not know her name, where she came from, or why she had been left alone in the forest. The sounds of the night surrounded her, but no answer came, and she cried quietly until the moon disappeared behind the clouds. The next morning the girl woke up with swollen eyes because she had cried for a long time during the night. The forest looked the same as it always had, yet something inside her had changed forever. She no longer felt completely happy running with the animals because the smoke she had seen in the distance remained in her thoughts. She carried the old cloth with her and climbed the same rocky hill again. The line of smoke was still there, rising gently into the sky. For the first time in her life, she felt that the forest might not be the whole world, and that somewhere far away there were people who knew things about her that she did not know herself. For many days she returned to the hill and watched the smoke. She stopped playing with the antelopes and spent less time following the elephants to the river. The animals noticed that she had become quiet and sad. The female elephant that had cared for her since she was a baby often stood beside her and gently touched her shoulder with her trunk. The girl rested her head against the animal and closed her eyes. She did not understand why her heart suddenly felt empty. She had everything she had ever known, yet she felt as though an invisible piece of her life was missing. One afternoon heavy rain began to fall across the forest. The girl ran beneath the giant baobab tree and sat there alone. As she touched the old cloth again, she noticed that one of its corners had come loose with age. She carefully pulled it apart and discovered a small piece of faded fabric hidden inside. On it was a picture of a crown stitched with golden thread. She stared at it for a long time because she had never seen such a symbol before. She could not understand why the sight of the crown made her heart beat faster and brought tears to her eyes. That night she dreamed for the first time about a place she had never seen. In the dream, she stood in a large building with tall walls and bright cloth hanging from the windows. She heard the laughter of a woman, but she could not see the woman's face. Then she heard someone softly calling her name, yet before she could answer, she woke up suddenly. The forest was dark and silent. Her heart raced as she looked around. She could still hear the voice in her mind, and for the rest of the night she sat awake, wondering if someone had once called her by a name she had forgotten. Several days later the girl made a decision that frightened her. She would walk toward the smoke and discover what lay beyond the forest. Before sunrise, she stood beside the female elephant and placed her hand on the animal's head. The elephant made a soft sound and stayed close to her as if it understood that something important was about to happen. Tears filled the girl's eyes because the forest was the only home she had ever known. Yet the questions inside her heart had become too heavy to carry. Slowly she turned away from the trees and began walking toward the unknown place beyond the distant smoke, never realizing that her life was about to change forever. The girl walked for many hours through parts of the forest she had never seen before. The trees became thinner, and the sounds of familiar birds slowly disappeared behind her. Every few steps she looked back because she missed the only home she had ever known. By afternoon her feet were tired, and she sat beside a stream to rest. She held the old cloth against her chest and wondered if she was making a mistake. The female elephant was no longer beside her, and for the first time in her life she felt completely alone. Even the wind seemed different, and the silence around her made her heart feel heavy. As the sun began to set, she reached the edge of the forest and stopped in shock. Before her lay a wide grassland, and far away, small houses with smoke rising from them. She had never seen houses before. She stared at them for a long time and felt both fear and excitement. The people living there did not know that a girl raised by animals was watching them from a distance. She wanted to run toward the houses, but she was afraid they might chase her away. So she remained hidden among the tall grass and waited for darkness to come. During the night, she slowly moved closer to the village. She could hear people laughing around fires and children talking to one another. The sounds filled her heart with sadness because she had never heard human voices before. She watched a mother carrying her sleeping child into a house, and tears suddenly rolled down her cheeks. She did not know why the sight hurt her so deeply, but it made her feel as though she had lost something precious many years ago. She sat beneath a tree outside the village and cried quietly until the stars filled the sky. Before sunrise, an old woman from the village came outside to gather firewood. She noticed the girl sitting beneath the tree and froze in surprise. The girl quickly stood up, frightened by seeing another human so close for the first time. Neither of them spoke. The old woman looked at the girl's tangled hair, her simple clothing made from leaves and cloth, and the strange sadness in her eyes. Then she noticed the old embroidered cloth in the girl's hands. A look of confusion crossed the old woman's face, but before she could say anything, the frightened girl ran back into the tall grass and disappeared. The girl did not return to the forest that day. Instead, she remained hidden near the village and watched the people from afar. She saw children playing together, women carrying water, and families eating beside small fires. Every sight filled her with both happiness and pain. She realized that she wanted to belong somewhere, yet she did not know where her place was. As the sun set again, she unfolded the old cloth one more time. For the first time she noticed that one corner contained faded writing that she could not read. She gently touched the strange marks with her fingers and whispered into the evening air, asking who had left her in the forest, and why nobody had ever come back for her. The next morning the girl woke before the sun and remained hidden behind a group of bushes near the village. She watched the people begin their day. Some carried baskets, some swept the ground, and some sat together talking and laughing. She could not understand their words, but hearing human voices filled her with a strange warmth. She wanted to walk into the village and ask them who she was, yet fear held her back. She was afraid that they would look at her and see only a strange girl from the forest. So she stayed hidden, clutching the old cloth tightly as if it were the only thing in the world that truly belonged to her. As the day grew hotter, she saw children running and playing together. They laughed loudly and chased one another through the dusty paths between the houses. The girl watched them for a long time without moving. She had spent her whole life among animals and had never played with another human being. Suddenly, she wondered what it would feel like to have a friend, to hear someone call her by a name, or to sit beside a family during the evening meal. A deep sadness settled inside her heart because she realized that she had missed so many things without even knowing they existed. While she sat there, the old woman who had seen her the day before came walking along the path carrying a basket of fruit. The woman stopped suddenly because she noticed the girl again. This time the old woman did not look frightened. Instead, she slowly sat on the ground and placed the basket beside her. The girl remained still, ready to run away at any moment. The old woman gently pushed the basket forward, offering the fruit without saying a word. After a long silence, the girl carefully moved closer and took one piece of fruit. For the first time in her life, another human being had shown her kindness. The old woman looked closely at the girl's face and then at the old cloth in her hands. A look of surprise slowly appeared in her eyes. She pointed at the cloth and asked something softly, but the girl did not understand the words. The old woman touched the faded embroidery with trembling fingers. Then she stared at the girl again, as though she were remembering something from many years ago. The woman seemed deeply troubled, but before she could say anything else, voices came from the village. The girl became frightened and quickly stepped back into the grass, disappearing once again. That evening the girl sat alone beneath a tree near the village and thought about the old woman. Nobody had ever looked at her with such sadness before. She unfolded the cloth once more and stared at the tiny crown stitched into its corner. Then she remembered the dream she had seen days earlier, the bright building, the distant voice, and the feeling that someone had once loved her very much. For the first time, she began to believe that the cloth and the dream were connected. Somewhere beyond the forest and beyond this village, there might still be people who remembered the little girl who had disappeared many years ago. The thought made her both hopeful and afraid, and she remained awake long after darkness covered the land. The following morning the girl returned to the same tree where she had met the old woman. She did not know why she had come back, but something inside her told her that the woman knew something important. The sun had barely risen when the old woman appeared carrying a small clay bowl filled with food and a gourd of water. She sat beside the girl and gently placed the food on the ground. For a long time neither of them spoke. Then the old woman slowly pointed at the cloth again and placed her hand over her heart. Tears suddenly filled the woman's eyes, and the girl could not understand why a stranger would look at her with so much sadness. The old woman carefully took the cloth into her hands and stared at the tiny crown stitched into its corner. Her fingers trembled so badly that she almost dropped it. Then she began speaking softly, though the girl could not understand the words. The woman pointed far beyond the village toward the distant hills, and then back at the cloth. She repeated the same actions several times as if trying to explain something important. Suddenly, she touched the girl's face and burst into tears. The girl sat completely still because nobody had ever touched her with such tenderness before. For a strange moment, she felt as if she had found someone who had been searching for her for a very long time. After calming herself, the old woman drew pictures in the dirt with a small stick. She drew a large building, then a tiny baby, and finally a basket beneath a tree. The girl's heart began beating faster. The woman then pointed at the girl and placed her hand over the drawing of the baby. Even though she did not understand every detail, the girl realized that the woman somehow knew about her past. She leaned closer, afraid to miss anything. The old woman then drew a crown above the large building and slowly looked into the girl's eyes. A chill passed through the girl's body because she suddenly felt that the answer to her entire life was sitting right in front of her. The old woman pointed toward the far hills again and began speaking with tears running down her cheeks. Though the girl could not understand the words, she understood the sadness. The woman took the girl's hands and held them tightly, almost as if she was afraid she would disappear again. Then she touched the crown on the cloth and bowed her head. The girl looked at the cloth, then at the old woman, and suddenly remembered the voice from her dream calling her name. She could not hear the name clearly, but it seemed close, almost hidden inside her memory. The feeling was so powerful that tears filled her own eyes, and she realized she was no longer searching only for answers. She was searching for herself. As evening approached, the old woman finally stood up and pointed once more toward the distant hills beyond the village. Then she carefully folded the cloth and placed it back into the girl's hands. She pressed the girl's fingers around it and nodded slowly. The message was clear even without words. Somewhere beyond those hills was the truth about the girl who had been left in the forest. The girl looked toward the fading sunlight and felt fear rise inside her heart. She had lived her entire life without knowing who she was, and now the answer seemed close enough to touch. Yet she also feared that the truth might bring more sadness than peace. That night she sat beneath the tree until the stars appeared, holding the cloth against her chest and wondering whether the people beyond the hills had forgotten her or had been searching for her all these years. Before the first light of dawn touched the sky, the girl stood beneath the tree one final time and looked back at the sleeping village. She had spent only a few days there, yet it was the first place where she had ever seen other human beings and the first place where someone had shown her kindness. The old woman came quietly and placed a small bundle of fruit and water into her hands. Then she pointed once again toward the distant hills. The girl nodded slowly, though fear filled her heart. She did not know what waited for her there. She only knew that if she remained where she was, she might never discover why she had been left alone in the forest. The journey was longer than she expected. The sun rose high, and the ground became dry and rocky. She crossed narrow streams and climbed small hills, stopping often to rest beneath trees. During the quiet moments, she thought about the animals that had raised her. She missed the gentle elephant more than anything else. She wondered whether the elephant had returned to the baobab tree and found her gone. The thought brought tears to her eyes. For the first time, she realized that even if she discovered her true family, a part of her heart would always belong to the forest that had protected her. As evening approached, she reached the top of a hill and suddenly froze. Far in the distance stood a large city surrounded by high walls. She had never seen anything so enormous in her life. Tall buildings rose above the walls, and smoke drifted into the sky from countless fires. The setting sun made the city glow with golden light. Her heart began beating so fast that she could hear it in her ears. She did not know why, but the sight of the city felt strangely familiar. It was as though she had seen it long ago and then forgotten it. She decided to spend the night on the hill and enter the city in the morning. As darkness fell, she wrapped herself in leaves and lay beneath a tree, but sleep would not come easily. The city lights flickered in the distance like tiny stars. Then, just as she closed her eyes, another memory appeared in her mind. She saw herself as a tiny child being held by someone wearing beautiful clothes. She heard a woman crying and felt warm tears falling onto her face. Then the memory disappeared as suddenly as it had come. The girl sat upright, breathing heavily, because the sadness in that memory felt painfully real. At sunrise, she walked toward the city and reached the great gates by midday. People moved in and out carrying baskets, goods, and water jars. She stood at a distance, afraid to go closer. Then her eyes fell upon something that made her heart stop. Carved above the gate was the exact same crown symbol that was stitched onto her old cloth. She stared at it in disbelief and slowly took the cloth from her bag. The symbols matched perfectly. Her hands began to shake. For many years the cloth had been nothing more than a mystery, but now it had become a key. Somewhere inside that great city was the answer to who she really was. The girl stood outside the city gates for a very long time, unable to move. People walked past her carrying baskets of grain, clay pots, and bundles of firewood, but she barely noticed them. Her eyes remained fixed on the crown carved above the entrance. She looked at the symbol, then at the cloth in her hands, and then back at the gate again. The two were exactly the same. A strange feeling spread through her chest, half hope and half fear. She had spent her whole life believing she belonged only to the forest, yet now a great city stood before her carrying the same mark that had been with her since she was a baby. She wondered if someone behind those walls had once held her, searched for her, or cried for her disappearance. Slowly she stepped through the gates and entered the city. Everything around her felt overwhelming. There were people everywhere, talking, laughing, and carrying out their daily work. Children chased one another through the streets, women sold fruits and cloth, and old men sat together beneath trees sharing stories. The girl had never seen so many human beings in one place. Every sound seemed loud to her ears, and every face seemed unfamiliar. She held her old cloth tightly against her chest because it was the only thing that made her feel safe. Though the city was filled with people, she had never felt more alone in her entire life. As she walked through the crowded streets, she noticed something that made her stop again. The crown symbol appeared everywhere. It was carved on stone walls, painted on banners, and stitched onto the clothing of certain people. The more she saw it, the more restless she became. It felt as if the city itself was speaking to her in a language she could almost understand. Suddenly, she passed a large building and saw a faded painting on one of its walls. The painting showed a king, a queen, and a very small child standing between them. Although the faces had faded with time, the child wore a cloth with the same crown symbol. The sight of the painting made her knees weak. She stepped closer and touched the image of the child with trembling fingers. A strange pain rose inside her chest, followed by a sadness so deep that tears immediately filled her eyes. She did not know why she was crying. She did not know who the people in the painting were. Yet looking at the little child felt like looking at a forgotten piece of herself. Several people walking nearby noticed her tears and glanced at her curiously, but she quickly stepped away and continued down the street. Her heart was beating so loudly that she could barely hear anything else. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, she reached the center of the city and saw the largest building she had ever imagined. It stood on a hill above the other houses and was surrounded by gardens and tall walls. Above its entrance flew banners carrying the same crown symbol. The moment she saw it, a memory flashed through her mind. She remembered bright rooms, warm hands lifting her into the air, and a soft voice singing to her. The memory lasted only a few seconds before disappearing again, but it left her standing completely still. She stared at the great building with tears in her eyes because, without understanding why, she suddenly felt that she had come home after being lost for many years.